My wife left me a note saying she's finding herself in Europe. She didn't know I froze all our joint accounts. So here I am, sitting in what used to be our kitchen, staring at a handwritten note that completely turned my world upside down. The coffee maker is still dripping from this morning, the same routine we'd shared for 8 years, except today there's no her humming while she gets ready for another day of what I thought was our normal life together. The note was propped against the sugar bowl, written in her careful handwriting on our wedding stationery. The irony wasn't lost on me. She explained how she needed to find herself, how she felt suffocated by our suburban life, how she'd been planning this European adventure for months. Months. While I was working extra hours to save for the vacation home we'd been dreaming about, she was apparently dreaming of something entirely different. What really got me was how calculated it all seemed. She'd taken her passport, packed 2 suitcases, and even arranged for her sister to pick up our dog while I was at my conference in Denver. She knew I'd be gone for 3 days, giving her the perfect window to disappear without any confrontation. The note mentioned she'd be gone for at least 6 months, maybe longer, depending on how her journey of self-discovery went. But here's what she didn't know, and this is where things get interesting. 3 weeks ago, I'd been going through our financial statements because I noticed some unusual spending patterns. Nothing major, just small withdrawals here and there, subscriptions I didn't recognize, and a few larger purchases that seemed out of character. Being the careful person I am, I decided to put temporary holds on our joint accounts, thinking maybe our information had been compromised. I never got around to telling her about the security measures because the bank said it would only take a few days to investigate, and honestly, with everything else going on in our lives, it slipped my mind. The holds were still in place when she left, which means she's somewhere in Europe right now with whatever cash she managed to take with her and probably a very rude awakening waiting at the first ATM she tries to use. The really twisted part is that I found her detailed itinerary hidden in her jewelry box when I was looking for our insurance papers. She had everything planned out: flights to Rome, trains through Italy and France, hostels booked in major cities, even restaurant recommendations she'd printed from travel blogs. This wasn't some spontaneous soul-searching mission, this was a carefully orchestrated escape plan. What hurts most isn't even the leaving, it's the months of lies that came before it. All those evenings when she said she was tired and went to bed early, she was probably researching train schedules and looking up European hostels. When she said she needed space to think about her career direction, she was actually planning to abandon the career, the marriage, and everything we'd built together. The worst part is how normal everything seemed just last week. We went grocery shopping together on Saturday. She helped me fix the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. We even talked about repainting the bedroom this spring. She kissed me goodbye when I left for Denver, told me to be safe, and said she'd miss me. All while knowing she'd be gone before I got back. Now I'm sitting here wondering if any of it was real. Were the past 8 years just an elaborate performance? Was she always planning an exit strategy, or did something specific trigger this need to flee? The note mentioned feeling trapped, but we'd never talked about that. She never expressed any dissatisfaction with our life together, never suggested she wanted to travel more or needed time apart. I've been going through everything: photos, text messages, emails, looking for signs I missed. There are little things now that seem significant in hindsight. She'd been more distant lately, more critical of our daily routines, less interested in making future plans. But I attributed that to work stress and the general winter blues that hit everyone around here. The financial situation is complicated now. With the accounts frozen, I can't even access our money either, which is ironically poetic. I'll have to go to the bank tomorrow and explain the situation, probably unfreeze everything and figure out how to protect myself legally. Part of me wants to leave the accounts locked just to see what happens, but that would hurt me as much as her. I've been texting her phone, but the messages aren't delivering. She either turned it off or got a European SIM card. Her sister claims she doesn't know anything about the travel plans, but I can tell she's lying. There's this awkward pause whenever I ask direct questions, and she keeps steering the conversation toward how I'm handling everything emotionally. The house feels enormous and strange without her presence. Her coffee mug is still in the dishwasher, her bookmark is still holding her place in the novel she was reading, her slippers are by the back door like she just stepped outside for a minute. It's like she's simultaneously completely gone and still everywhere I look. I keep oscillating between anger and genuine worry. Part of me is furious about the deception, the financial implications, and the complete disregard for our marriage vows. But another part of me is concerned about her safety. Europe isn't dangerous, but traveling alone with limited funds and no easy way to access more money could put her in vulnerable situations. The timing couldn't be worse either. We have a mortgage payment due next week and I was counting on her income to cover some upcoming expenses. Now I'm not even sure if she's planning to keep her job or if she's just abandoning everything. Her work hasn't called looking for her yet, but they probably think she's sick or taking vacation days. I've been Googling things like international banking and how to handle finances when your spouse disappears. The legal implications are murky. We're married, so technically she has every right to access our joint accounts, but the fraud protection measures I put in place might complicate things. I might need to consult with someone who understands both family law and international banking regulations. The strangest part is that I'm not sure what I want to happen next. Do I want her to come home? Do I want her to realize she made a mistake and beg for forgiveness? Or do I want her to stay gone and give me the space to figure out what I want from life without constantly wondering when the next abandonment is coming? Our friends don't know yet. I've been making excuses about why she's not answering calls or showing up to planned events. Part of me is embarrassed, like her leaving reflects some failure on my part as a partner. Another part of me wants to tell everyone exactly what happened, if only to have someone validate that this situation is as crazy as it feels. I found myself looking through our wedding album tonight, trying to remember what it felt like to believe in forever. We looked so happy in those pictures, so certain about our future together. I wonder if she was already having doubts then, or if this is something that developed gradually over the years. The note didn't mention divorce or separation, just this vague idea of needing time and space to discover who she is outside of our relationship. But how do you come back from something like this? How do you rebuild trust with someone who spent months planning their secret escape? How do you share a life with someone who might disappear again the moment things feel too routine or comfortable? I've been having these strange moments where I catch myself planning things as if she's still here. I'll think about what to make for dinner and automatically consider her preferences, or I'll see something funny and reach for my phone to text her before remembering she's unreachable somewhere across the ocean. The house phone rang earlier, and for a split second I thought it might be her calling from some European payphone with a dramatic story about realizing she'd made a terrible mistake. Instead, it was someone trying to sell me insurance, which felt like the universe playing a particularly cruel joke. Update 1. It's been a week since I posted, and wow, the responses really helped me think through this situation more clearly. A lot of you suggested I should focus on protecting myself legally and financially, so that's exactly what I did. And let me tell you, the plot has thickened considerably. First, I went to the bank and had a long conversation with the manager about the account freezes. Turns out, those unusual transactions I'd noticed weren't random purchases, they were cash advances and transfers to an account I'd never seen before. The bank's fraud department had actually flagged several of them, which is why they were so quick to implement the security holds when I requested them. Here's where it gets really interesting. She had opened a separate account at a different bank 2 months ago. The transfers were going there, and she'd been slowly moving money out of our joint accounts in small amounts to avoid triggering any automatic alerts. The bank showed me the pattern. It started small, maybe $50 or $100 at a time, but in the last few weeks before she left, the amounts had gotten larger. So this wasn't just some spontaneous decision to find herself in Europe. This was a calculated financial plan that had been in motion for months. She'd basically been stealing from our joint accounts to fund her escape, thinking I'd never notice until she was long gone. When I realized the full scope of what she'd done, I felt this strange mix of relief and betrayal. Relief because it confirmed that my instincts about something being off were correct, and betrayal because the level of premeditation was so much deeper than I'd imagined. The bank was incredibly helpful once I explained the situation. They reversed the account freezes for me but implemented new security measures that require in-person verification for any large transactions. They also helped me understand my options for the money she'd already transferred. Since we're married and they were joint accounts, it's complicated but not impossible to address. But here's the really crazy part, and I'm still processing this. She tried to use one of our credit cards 3 days ago. The transaction was declined because of the security holds, but it showed up in the fraud monitoring system. She was in Paris, trying to pay for a hotel room that cost more per night than we usually spend on entertainment in a month. The failed transaction triggered an automatic notification to both of our phones. That's how I found out she was not only safe but apparently living much more luxuriously than her note about hostels and self-discovery had suggested. The hotel she tried to book was in one of the most expensive districts in Paris, not exactly the budget backpacking adventure she described. This made me start questioning everything in her note again. If she had enough money transferred to her private account to attempt expensive hotel stays, why all the drama about needing to find herself through budget travel and simple living? Was the whole thing just another layer of deception? I decided to do some investigating of my own. I logged into our phone account and looked at her data usage and location tracking from before she left. The results were eye-opening. She'd been researching not just travel itineraries, but expensive restaurants, luxury accommodations, and high-end shopping districts in major European cities. This wasn't a soul-searching journey, it was a vacation funded by money she'd been secretly siphoning from our accounts. The betrayal felt even deeper once I realized she hadn't just left to figure out her life, she'd left to live a lifestyle we couldn't afford while we were together using money she'd been hiding from me for months. All those conversations about being careful with our budget, about saving for our future, about making responsible financial decisions, she was having those conversations while literally stealing from us to fund her European fantasy. I also found out that her sister knew way more than she'd been letting on. When I confronted her with specific questions about the timeline and the financial planning, she finally admitted that she'd been helping with some of the logistics. Not the money part, she claims she didn't know about that, but she'd been receiving packages for her, helping her research travel requirements, and even storing some of her belongings that she didn't want to take but also didn't want to leave in our house. The sister tried to justify it by saying she was worried about her mental health and thought maybe some time away would help her figure things out. But when I pointed out that mental health journeys don't typically require stealing money and lying for months, she got defensive and said I wouldn't understand because I'd never supported her dreams and ambitions. That comment really hit me hard because it was so unfair and inaccurate. I'd always encouraged her to pursue whatever made her happy. When she wanted to take those art classes, I rearranged my schedule to make it work financially. When she talked about maybe changing careers, I offered to support us while she went back to school. When she mentioned wanting to travel more, I started researching trips we could take together. But apparently none of that mattered because what she really wanted was to escape from me entirely, and she was willing to lie and steal to make it happen. The hardest part is that I keep finding myself missing the person I thought she was, even while I'm angry at the person she actually turned out to be. I miss our morning conversations, I miss having someone to share little daily observations with, I miss the comfort of routine and partnership. But I'm also realizing that maybe those things weren't as real or stable as I believed. Work has been a good distraction, though my concentration isn't great. My colleagues have noticed I seem stressed, but I've been vague about the details. It's hard to explain that your wife didn't just leave, she executed a months-long plan to steal money and disappear to Europe while making you think everything was fine. I've been staying busy with projects around the house that we'd been putting off. It helps to have concrete tasks with clear outcomes, unlike the emotional mess of trying to figure out what comes next in this situation. I painted the guest room, fixed the fence in the backyard, and reorganized the garage. Physical work that produces visible results feels therapeutic in a way that thinking in circles about her motivations doesn't. The legal consultation I mentioned in my first post happened yesterday. The situation is complex because of the international aspect and the fact that we're married. The money she transferred to her private account before leaving is technically community property, but proving that she took it with intent to permanently deprive me of it is more complicated when she's my spouse. However, the pattern of secret transfers and the deception involved might qualify as financial abuse or fraud even within a marriage. The attorney suggested documenting everything, transaction records, her travel spending, the timeline of deception in case I decide to pursue legal action or if she tries to claim spousal support later. One thing that's become clear is that I need to start thinking about this situation as potentially permanent. Even if she comes back, the trust is so fundamentally broken that I'm not sure we could rebuild a healthy relationship. And if she doesn't come back, I need to start planning for a future that looks completely different from what I expected. The house feels different now, not just empty, but like I'm seeing it clearly for the first time. I'm noticing things that were probably always there, but that I overlooked when I was focused on maintaining the illusion of our happy life together. The way she'd rearranged furniture to face away from spaces we used to share, how she'd gradually moved her personal items to parts of the house I didn't frequent, small signs that she'd been mentally withdrawing long before she physically left. I've been getting calls from her work asking about her absence. Apparently, she used up all her vacation days and sick leave, and now she's officially absent without authorization. They've been understanding so far, but they need to know her intentions soon. I honestly don't know what to tell them because I don't know her intentions either. The credit card she tried to use in Paris hasn't had any more attempted charges, but I set up alerts for all our accounts so I'll know immediately if she tries to access any of our funds again. Part of me is curious about what she's doing for money now, and another part of me doesn't want to know because it might involve asking her family for help or making other decisions that will complicate our situation even further. Update 2. 3 weeks have passed since my last update, and I honestly don't know whether to laugh or cry at how this situation has developed. You all are not going to believe what happened because I certainly didn't see it coming. So remember how she tried to use our credit card in Paris and it got declined? Well, apparently that wasn't her only financial strategy. I got a call from my bank last Tuesday asking if I was aware that someone had applied for a loan using our joint tax returns and property information. The loan was for $25,000 and it had been submitted from an internet cafe in Barcelona. At first, I thought this was some kind of identity theft situation unrelated to her European adventure. But when the bank sent me copies of the application, it was clearly her handwriting, and she'd used information that only someone with intimate knowledge of our finances would know. She'd attempted to use our house as collateral for a personal loan without my knowledge or consent while traveling around Europe. The loan was denied because the security flags on our accounts triggered additional verification requirements, but the fact that she tried it at all completely changed my understanding of what was happening. This wasn't just someone having a midlife crisis or needing space to figure out their identity. This was someone systematically attempting to access as much money as possible through any means available. I immediately called the attorney I'd consulted with and scheduled an emergency meeting. She explained that attempting to fraudulently obtain loans using jointly owned property could constitute serious financial crimes even between spouses. More importantly, it demonstrated a pattern of intentional financial deception that would be relevant in any future legal proceedings. But wait, it gets weirder. 2 days after I found out about the loan application, I got a Facebook message from someone I didn't recognize. The profile picture showed a woman about our age standing in front of what looked like the Eiffel Tower. She said she'd been traveling around Europe and had met my wife in a hostel in Amsterdam. According to this stranger, my wife had been telling people she was recently divorced and traveling to celebrate her newfound freedom. She'd been using a different name, not her maiden name, but something completely made up, and had been presenting herself as someone who'd just escaped from an unhappy marriage with someone controlling and financially abusive. The woman who messaged me said she was reaching out because something about the story didn't add up. She'd looked up the social media profiles my wife had mentioned, found our photos together, and realized that the timeline of the divorce didn't match the recent pictures of us looking happy together. She thought I should know that someone was using my identity as part of a false narrative about an abusive relationship. Reading that message felt like being punched in the stomach. Not only had she stolen money and lied about her travel plans, she was now rewriting our entire relationship history to justify her actions to strangers. She was telling people I was abusive to explain why she'd had to secretly plan her escape, when the reality was that I'd been completely blindsided by someone I thought I knew and trusted. The Facebook stranger shared some other details that painted a picture of someone living very differently than the budget backpacking experience described in her note. She'd been staying in nice hotels, eating at expensive restaurants, and shopping for luxury items. She told people she was using money from her divorce settlement, which obviously didn't exist since we're still married, and she'd actually been stealing from our joint accounts. I spent that whole day feeling like I was living in some kind of alternate reality. How do you process the fact that someone you shared a life with for 8 years is not only willing to steal from you, but also willing to destroy your reputation by claiming you were abusive? The level of betrayal was so complete that I started questioning my own memories and perceptions. But then something interesting happened. I got angry in a way that felt productive rather than destructive. Instead of just feeling hurt and confused, I started feeling motivated to protect myself and get control of the situation. I contacted the bank and reported the fraudulent loan application. I also asked them to put additional security measures on all of our accounts and to provide me with detailed records of all transactions and attempted transactions over the past 6 months. I wanted a complete picture of her financial deception. Then I called her work and had an honest conversation about her status. I explained that she'd left the country without notice and that I didn't know when or if she was planning to return. They were understanding but said they couldn't hold her position indefinitely. They agreed to give her until the end of the month to make contact and clarify her intentions. I also reached out to several of our mutual friends and family members to let them know what was actually happening. I didn't want her version of events, where I'm apparently some kind of controlling monster she had to escape from, to spread unchallenged. Most people were shocked and supportive, though a few seemed skeptical, like maybe there was more to the story that I wasn't sharing. Her sister's reaction was particularly telling. When I told her about the false abuse allegations, she got very quiet and then said she thought maybe her sister had been building up resentment for longer than anyone realized. She didn't defend the lying or stealing, but she also didn't seem entirely surprised by the narrative about feeling trapped and controlled. That conversation made me realize that there might have been warning signs I missed, not because I was actually controlling or abusive, but because she'd been reframing normal relationship dynamics in her mind as oppressive. Maybe my suggestions about budgeting felt like financial control. Maybe my preferences about how we spent our weekends felt like limitations on her freedom. Maybe my contentment with our life felt like complacency that was holding her back. None of that would justify lying, stealing, or making false accusations, but it might explain how she rationalized her actions to herself. People can convince themselves of almost anything if they need to justify behavior they know is wrong. The attorney recommended that I start documenting everything, not just the financial fraud, but also the false statements about abuse. If she decides to file for divorce and make those allegations official, having evidence of her pattern of deception could be important for protecting both my reputation and my financial interests. I've also been thinking about what I want my life to look like going forward, assuming she doesn't come back or that our marriage is effectively over even if she does. It's strange to suddenly have to reimagine your future when you thought you had everything figured out, but it's also somewhat liberating. Without her income, I'll need to adjust my budget, but I can afford the mortgage and basic expenses on my own. I've been looking at the house with fresh eyes, thinking about what changes I might want to make if it's going to be just my space. Some of the decorating choices we made together don't really reflect my preferences, and I'm realizing I'd been compromising on things that matter to me more than I admitted. I've also been reconnecting with friends I'd somewhat neglected during our marriage. Not because she prevented me from seeing them, but because couple time had gradually replaced individual friendships in ways that now seem limiting. It's been good to remember who I am outside of our relationship and to get perspective from people who knew me before we got together. The strangest thing is that I'm starting to feel grateful that this happened now rather than later. If she was capable of this level of deception and manipulation, it probably would have gotten worse over time. If she was willing to steal money and spread false abuse allegations to justify her actions, what else might she have been capable of in a few more years? I still have moments of missing what I thought we had together, but I'm also starting to feel relieved that I don't have to wonder anymore if something was wrong or if I was imagining the distance between us. The uncertainty was harder than the truth, even though the truth is painful and infuriating. The credit monitoring alerts have been quiet since the failed loan application, but I'm staying vigilant. I've also changed the locks on the house and updated the security system, not because I'm afraid of her coming back, but because I want to feel like my space is truly secure and private. Work has been understanding about my need for flexible scheduling while I deal with all the legal and financial aspects of the situation. Having concrete tasks to focus on has been helpful for my mental state, and my colleagues have been supportive without being intrusive. I've been sleeping better lately, which surprised me. I thought the stress and uncertainty would make insomnia worse, but somehow having clarity about what's actually happening feels better than living with vague anxiety about relationship problems I couldn't identify or address. Final update. It's been 2 months since my last update, and I need to share how this whole crazy situation resolved itself, because the ending is not what anyone would have predicted, including me. Last month, I got a call from the American consulate in Madrid. They told me that an American citizen had been detained and was requesting consular assistance, and that I was listed as her emergency contact. My heart started racing because I immediately knew it was her, and despite everything that had happened, my first reaction was worry about her safety. The consular officer explained that she'd been arrested for credit card fraud. Apparently, she'd been using fake credit cards to pay for her European lifestyle, and when those stopped working, she'd moved on to more sophisticated fraud schemes. She'd been caught trying to use forged documents to open bank accounts in Madrid, and the Spanish authorities had connected her to several other fraudulent transactions across multiple countries. What I learned over the next few conversations with various officials was that her behavior had escalated far beyond anything I could have imagined. After her attempts to access our money failed, she'd gotten involved with a group of international fraud artists who taught her how to create false identities and forge financial documents. She wasn't just a desperate woman trying to fund her travels anymore, she'd become an active participant in organized financial crime. The consular officer said she'd been claiming that she was fleeing domestic violence and that her husband had cut off her access to money, which was why she'd been forced to resort to illegal means to survive. She'd asked them to contact me not for help but to serve as a witness to her abuse allegations. They wanted to verify her story before providing assistance. I had to explain the real situation, that she'd stolen money from our joint accounts, attempted fraudulent loan applications, and disappeared with a fabricated story about finding herself in Europe. I provided documentation of her financial deception and the timeline of events. The consular officer was professional but clearly skeptical of her abuse claims once they understood the full context. Here's where the story takes another unexpected turn. While she was in detention in Madrid, I received a call from someone identifying himself as a private investigator hired by her parents. Apparently, they'd been receiving desperate calls from her asking for money, claiming she was stranded in Europe after escaping from her abusive husband. They'd hired this investigator to verify her story before sending her the substantial amount of money she was requesting. The investigator had done his homework and discovered the same information I'd been dealing with: the secret bank account, the fraudulent loan applications, the false identity she'd been using while traveling. He'd also uncovered some additional details that were news to me. It turns out she'd been planning this escape for over a year, not just the few months I'd discovered. She'd been researching expatriate communities, international banking laws, and ways to establish new identities in foreign countries. She'd also been in contact with other people who'd successfully disappeared from their lives in America, getting advice on how to cut ties permanently. The investigator found evidence that she'd intended this to be a permanent disappearance, not a temporary journey of self-discovery. She'd been planning to establish a new identity in Europe and never return to the United States. The story about finding herself was just meant to buy her time to get established abroad before I realized she was never coming back. Her parents were devastated when they learned the truth. They offered to pay for her legal representation in Spain, but they also made it clear that they wouldn't be enabling her behavior by providing money for her to continue running. They wanted her to face the consequences of her actions and hopefully get whatever help she needed to address the underlying issues that had led to such extreme behavior. Meanwhile, I had to make some difficult decisions about how to handle the situation from my end. The Spanish authorities wanted to know if I intended to pursue charges related to the money she'd stolen from our accounts. The American authorities were interested in the fraudulent loan applications and identity theft aspects of her crimes. After consulting with my attorney, I decided to cooperate fully with all investigations but to focus on protecting myself rather than seeking revenge. I provided all the documentation and testimony requested, but I didn't push for maximum penalties. Part of me still remembered loving the person I thought she was, even though I now understood that person might never have really existed. The legal process was complicated and took several weeks to resolve. She eventually pled guilty to multiple fraud charges and was sentenced to 18 months in a Spanish prison, followed by deportation back to the United States. The Spanish authorities were willing to consider the deportation in lieu of additional prison time because she was a first-time offender for these particular crimes and because the amounts involved weren't in the highest penalty categories. During this time, I had to make decisions about our marriage and our shared assets. I filed for divorce based on irreconcilable differences and financial misconduct. The divorce proceedings were straightforward since she was in no position to contest anything, and since I had extensive documentation of her theft and deception. I was able to recover most of the money she'd transferred to her secret account, though not the cash she'd withdrawn or spent during her travels. The house, our retirement accounts, and other major assets were divided according to state law, but I retained control of everything since she was incarcerated and facing deportation. The most surreal part of this whole experience was when she tried to contact me from prison. She wrote several letters that were initially confiscated by Spanish authorities as part of their investigation, but were eventually forwarded to me through the consular office. Reading them was like hearing from a completely different person than the woman I'd been married to. In the letters, she alternated between blaming me for driving her to desperate measures and expressing remorse for the pain she'd caused. She claimed that feeling trapped in our marriage had made her feel like she had no choice but to escape through deception, but she also acknowledged that her actions had gone far beyond anything that could be justified by relationship problems. She asked me to forgive her and to consider giving our marriage another chance once she'd served her time and returned to the United States. She promised that her experience in prison had helped her understand what was really important in life and that she wanted to rebuild the trust and partnership we'd once shared. Reading those letters was emotionally complicated. There were moments when she sounded like the woman I'd fallen in love with years ago, expressing genuine remorse and insight into her behavior. But there were also moments when she was still trying to manipulate the narrative, still trying to make her choices seem inevitable rather than deliberate. I wrote back once, a brief letter explaining that while I didn't wish her harm and hoped she would get whatever help she needed, our marriage was over and I wouldn't be waiting for her return. I tried to be kind but clear that too much had happened for us to ever rebuild a healthy relationship. The finalized divorce came through just before she was released from prison in Spain. By the time she was deported back to the United States, we were legally strangers and I'd moved forward with my life in ways that made reconciliation impossible even if I'd wanted it. Now, 6 months after that first note I found in our kitchen, I'm living a completely different life than I expected, but it's a life that feels authentic and peaceful in ways that our marriage apparently never was. I've made changes to the house that reflect my actual preferences rather than compromises. I've rekindled friendships that had faded during my marriage. I've started pursuing interests that I'd put on the back burner while focusing on what I thought was our shared future. I still have moments of grief for the loss of what I thought we had together, but I also have a deep sense of relief that I no longer have to wonder what was wrong or walk on eggshells around someone who was secretly planning to betray and abandon me. The uncertainty and subtle tension I'd been living with for months before she left makes sense now. I was picking up on her deception even when I couldn't consciously identify what was happening. The financial recovery took time, but I'm in a stable position now. I've learned a lot about protecting myself from fraud and about the warning signs of financial deception within relationships. I've also learned that loving someone doesn't mean you really know them and that trust, once broken at this level, might not be reparable regardless of circumstances. I don't know what happened to her after she returned to the United States. Her parents mentioned that she was staying with relatives while figuring out her next steps, but they respected my request not to share details about my new life or contact information. I hope she gets whatever help she needs to address the issues that led to such destructive choices, but I also know that's not my responsibility anymore. Looking back, I can see that there were probably signs of the person she became, but they were subtle and mixed in with genuine good qualities that made them easy to rationalize or overlook. She was always good at getting what she wanted through charm and manipulation, but I'd interpreted that as confidence and social skill rather than as potential warning signs about her character. The experience has made me more cautious about trusting people completely, but also more confident in my ability to handle unexpected challenges. If I can get through discovering that my wife of 8 years was a fraud artist who'd been planning to disappear to Europe using stolen money, I can probably handle whatever other surprises life throws at me. I've been dating again recently, taking things very slowly and being much more attentive to consistency between words and actions. It's been interesting to interact with people who are straightforward about their intentions and feelings after years of trying to decode hidden meanings and managing someone else's secret agendas. The house that once felt empty and strange now feels like home in a way it never did when she was living here. I've realized that the tension and uncertainty I was living with had been affecting my comfort in my own space, and now that it's genuinely mine, I can relax in ways I didn't even realize I'd been unable to do. This whole experience taught me that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to a relationship is also the best thing that can happen to your life. If she hadn't left that note and disappeared to Europe, I might have spent years more trying to fix problems I couldn't identify with someone who was fundamentally dishonest about who she was and what she wanted. I'm grateful now for the clarity, even though the path to getting it was painful and surreal. Sometimes the universe has to hit you over the head with reality before you can see what was actually happening in your life, and sometimes that reality, however shocking, is exactly what you needed to move forward into something better.